right? So the only thing that you can ever control in your reality is actually your mind. As cliche as it sounds, a lot of people actually don't realize that. Because let me break this down in even more simpler terms, right? Because if you're a person who's hyper emotional or gets angry or stressed out or anxious from the little stuff, let me explain you a hypothetical scenario, right? Because let's break it down. These specific triggers that make you angry, right? There's specific stimuli that happen in your environment. There's specific things that basically your receptors receive. Your brain somehow processes it, and it basically creates a specific reaction, right? And so, in other words, what I'm trying to say throughout this video is that you're supposed to control that specific process, because that process from that stimuli, processing it to a specific action, that is essentially your mind, right? And so if you think about it from a logical perspective, that means that if you're able to control the processing part, right, from converting that information to an action, you're able to control, if not every specific part of an emotion, right? So in other words, if you're able to kind of transform every specific set of reaction to your stimuli, you're possibly, hypothetically speaking, able to convert that into every positive type of action. So in other words, you might not be angry or sad or all these negative emotions ever again. Now, this specific basic principle is highlighted in Seneca's meditation book. So if you guys read the philosophy of Stoicism, this is mentioned many times. But what a lot of people misinterpret about Stoicism is they think that you are essentially locking away your emotions, throwing the key away, and hoping that the emotions don't, come again. And that's quite frankly the opposite, because the Greeks don't believe that emotions are something that will throw you off into a chaos of life. In fact, it's quite the opposite, because emotions should guide you as a specific navigator, right? Because emotions, morally speaking, have either a positive or negative impact on you, and so your reactions, or in other words, your actions, is basically a response to that specific emotion, right? And so what I want you guys to understand is that when a specific environmental stimuli gets triggered, right? Something specifically happens. I don't know, you have an argument with your partner, or your boss pisses you off, or you're not doing so well in school, you receive an F in your exam. And what happens is that obviously from a neurological perspective, your brain has to do something with that specific input, right? It's basically raw information accumulated, and your brain has to convert that into a specific action. And as much as you don't want it, your brain actually has to do it. It's basically how you have been and how we all have been hardwired. And so what I want you guys to understand is that is a very fundamental process. So that means that action that will be basically created through that reaction is something that will definitely happen. But instead of throwing a chair out of the window or smacking yourself or beating yourself down because of it, I want you to basically convert it into something more positive. And so how does that work specifically, right? How do I not get angry through a specific situation and turn it into something that's more hopeful or more positive, right? And so let's talk about the exam situation for a moment. Let's say that you hypothetically didn't do so well in your examination, but instead of, beating yourself about it, or, being stressed and anxious about your next exams, you would want to, motivate yourself. You want to push yourself and study harder. So how does that work from a practical area, right? From a practical field. And so the number one, and that's the most important, and it's mentioned as well in the philosophies of Stoicism, is awareness. And awareness is, if not one of the most crucial yet important element of this entire topic. And so what is awareness? Awareness is, from a logical perspective, awareness is the understanding of that action. And as cliche as it sounds, a lot of people aren't really aware of what is actually going on, right? And so you can see those specific examples for narcissistic people, because when people are narcissistic, they don't essentially realize what they're doing wrong, which is even worse, because if you don't realize what you're doing wrong, you don't know how to react properly to it, right? And so the good news, I at least hope, is that you are not that narcissistic as other people. I definitely would assume so. And so, in other words, you're able to realize what is going on. And I assume you guys are very smart people as well. And so, the next time you guys have a negative stimuli, or something that is basically pissing you off in your environment, I want you to be literally 100% aware of what's going on. But the difference is, this time, right, in specifics of awareness, instead of just suppressing it or ignoring that feeling, I want you to actually start accepting it, right? And so I'll give you a nice metaphor, right, to illustrate this example I'm basically trying to talk about. And so next time, if somebody pisses you off, realize and acknowledge that, right? And you realize and acknowledge that by logically thinking, okay, this person has pissed me off. How do I react to this situation? Now, through that statement alone, you are creating something called awareness. And even though you haven't created a plan or strategy on how to react, you already nailed the first step, which is basically awareness. And so once you are aware, right, of this situation, then you can start creating your plan, right? And so the person pissed you off, I don't know, he said something wrong, or he said something you didn't like, and suddenly you want to react to it. And your first line of defense, you were aware, you're like, okay, this person is trying to piss me off. How do I react? And so what I personally do in these type of situations, I put myself in the other person's shoe. And so this terminology in psychology is called empathy. And I believe if you guys are psychology students, you've probably heard about this a lot. But empathy is very often, or if not, correlated to soft skills. And soft skills is correlated to EQ. And basically people with high intelligence points, and trust me, I am not one of those, they have a great ability of soft skills. In other words, a great ability of communication that does not often involve verbal communication. So in other words, they're able to understand body language, specific other types of communication, such as, I don't know, eye contact, gestures, etc., etc. But the point is that they develop an extent of empathy. And so what happens is, okay, we got step 1, be aware. Step 2, we have empathy, soft skills, and awareness. And so if you have empathy, you basically put yourself, why is it so blurred? You put yourself in their shoes. And so what happens is, when you put yourself in their shoes, you begin to realize what their intentions are, right? And so this is where my decision-making processes come from, because I try to basically visualize, if not imagine, okay, this person said something to me, but I would like to know what his intentions are. And I've learned this throughout my professional football career. And so if you're playing football, you probably know about this, that when you're training or when you're playing on the same team, sometimes you have teammates who say something not nice to you, right? And so at first hand, if you don't have awareness, you just get pissed. You shout at him back and be like, I don't know, fuck off, you do your own work, or, you're pissing me off, just leave me alone. But if you have awareness, you're like, okay, you know what, he's telling me something. And then comes empathy, right? Soft skills. Then you put yourself into his shoes, and then you're thinking like, okay, what is his intention here, right? Does he actually want me to, like, am I doing something wrong? Does he want me to play better because it'll help the team? Or are my passes, like we're talking about football, right? Are my passes not delivering so well? Or if I position myself differently, will that make me score better? And if not, make the team win, right? And so if you use that type of strategy, right, to kind of figure out what his intentions are, then you will figure out, through this example, okay, you know what, his intentions are good. He wants the team to win, so do I. And maybe he's pissed off me because if I change whatever I'm currently doing wrong, maybe it may change the long-term outlook of the entire football game. And with that being said, by the end of the game, we might even win it. Who knows? So with that being said, I'll logically think, okay, he actually has good intentions. Maybe his style of communication or his verbs, choice of words are not correct. And so if that still pisses you off, and it has for me, for a while, I would basically, what I would do is, after, you know, the scenario, if we're still talking about football, after the game, or after, you know, an hour or so, after it's all over, then you go to the person and be like, hey, listen, I understand your intentions, they're absolutely positive, it's great, we're on the same boat, but I do appreciate it if you use a different choice of words. And so that is you know, a very basic example of how you can control your emotions a little bit more. And essentially, it's just being aware and putting yourself in their shoes. And so, with that alone, you're able to at least, you know, control your mind to some extent, that you can, you know, put yourself in a better position to react appropriately to to that specific situation, right? Because you don't want to say something or do something that you ultimately regret, right? Especially, you know, to your loved ones or people who are close to you. So you want to put yourself in such a manner where your reactions would be just, and if not appropriate, to, I don't know, what type of shit he's doing to you. So with that being said, I hope that you are able to control your mind, and if not, to some degree, improve your life day by day. See you soon.